From the Arizona Daily Star and Tucson.com, this is the Wildcast.
Another episode of the Wildcast podcast coming your way on Apple, Spotify, other podcasting platforms. I'm Justin Spears here with my guy, Michael Lev. Going to be talking a number of things today. Going to be covering some football, some basketball, and what's the common denominator? Well, it's all Arizona Wildcats talk. Maybe some national championship and kind of hangover stuff from the season. I can't believe the season's already officially come to an end, Lev.
So, okay, you say that, but if this were next year, and if Arizona were to make the college football playoff, okay, a lot of ifs here, but possible, right? I'm looking at this schedule for the new CFP, and the quarterfinals would be December 31st and January 1st. Maybe Arizona will be able to make the Rose Bowl after all, since that's a quarterfinal game. West Coast team, etc. on January 1st. Imagine that. So the semifinals, we're recording this on January 10th. The second semifinal would be today.
Yeah.
So we're looking at a whole new world when it comes to the schedule for college football. And we've talked about this a little bit. Like, there's already this December crunch because of the transfer portal, coaching carousel, early signing day. Now you're going to have the CFP starting next year on December 20th, December 21st. I mean, that's usually a date that's reserved for the early signing day, right?
Yep.
So they're going to have to, the powers that be, whoever they are in the world of college football, are going to have to get together and figure out how can we fix or at least improve the calendar, because the current situation is unworkable.
Yeah.
I think it was Lane Kiffin said, like, does the NFL like start free agency like right before the playoffs? Like no other sport does that.
Yeah. Like
there's the season and there's the off season, but with college football, the off season somehow starts in season.
Yeah.
So you should be thankful, I think, that your season's over at this point, because it could go longer next year if things go really well for the Wildcats, which we think they might. But of course, that would be really exciting as well.
I wonder how the NFL feels about all of this too, because we're talking about the season ending in late January, and NFL is probably like, well, we got playoffs too. Like, we dominate the month of January and also early February. College football is a little bit, in some ways, stealing our thunder.
Those dates, okay, so December 31st next year is a Tuesday, or the end of this year is a Tuesday, and January 1st is a Wednesday, okay? January 9th and 10th are a Thursday and a Friday. So there won't be direct conflicts in terms of TV windows with these games, but in terms of, like, the limited amount of oxygen that is expended talking about football.
Yeah.
Right? The college football is going to cut in to the NFL's territory a little bit. They're going to try to set up on their corner. So we'll see how that goes. Considering that ESPN is deeply invested in both, I'm sure they'll find room for everybody on their airwaves and platforms and so forth. But it's a good point that you make, and it's a big change for those of us who are used to things being a certain way.
Thoughts though on the college football season that was? I mean, of course, Arizona, it was a big year for them, but it was the last year of the Pac-12 as we know it, and Washington, of course, in typical Pac-12 fashion, was good but not good enough to win the big game and win the national championship. People are wondering, what's going on with Jim Harbaugh? Where will he coach next season? Should Michigan even be the national champion because of their sign stealing scandal? Will that, eventually be vacated by the NCAA? I don't think it will, but man, I just look back on this season, Lev. What a season it was. Very memorable.
Yeah, it was a very memorable season for the Pac-12. First of all, of course, because it's the last year of the Pac-12 as we've known it. There could be some new version of it that rises from the ashes if Oregon State and Washington State are able to pull some teams in and keep the branding and so forth. But you had, it was essentially like a play-in game between Oregon and Washington that was very watched and scrutinized, and you had a team breakthrough, which hadn't happened in a really long time. for this conference, and they made it all the way to the title game. And then in the title game, I think you saw the reality of when you really get down to it, football is still blocking,
it's all in the trenches.
Big boys. Michigan had big, strong people. I mean, that looked like, the score was pretty lopsided. The game was close for a while, but it never felt like Washington was really like in the game.
Yeah.
Right? That felt like, to me, peak Stanford when Harbaugh was at Stanford. Like, everyone else is playing the spread, and we're going to have 2 and 3 tight ends, and we're just going to beat the crap out of you.
Yeah.
And they beat the crap out of Washington in that game. They beat up their offensive line. Poor Michael Penix. I mean, his ankle, his ribs, like, that's that scene they showed of him just sort of like slowly walking up the tunnel at the end of the game. Like, they beat him up.
Yeah. And even like some of the throws that he was able to get out, they weren't always clean. It always felt like he was like a little bit off balance at all times.
Yeah, it felt like he was rushed. So applying all of that to Arizona, when Jedd Fisch came here, he never set out goals like, we want to win X number of games in a certain year. We want to do this. We want to. It was always like, we want to be a tough out.
Yeah.
Okay. We want to be a tough team. And he's put a lot of focus quietly on the lines. It doesn't get a lot of headlines when you do that. It doesn't really do that much necessarily for your recruiting class rankings, but they've invested a lot in offensive line and defensive line. A lot of the offensive linemen are still young. We haven't seen them play from the last couple classes, which is okay. That's to be expected. Offensive line is a position, that's a developmental position for the most part. We have seen the fruits of their defensive line investment in terms of both young players and transfer portal. If you're gonna compete with the big boys, you're gonna have to get it done in the trenches. And we saw a little bit of vulnerability, I felt like, in the Alamo Bowl.
Yeah.
Without Jordan Morgan. Like, Noah Fifita was under pressure a lot.
Yeah.
In that game. And you were there, you saw it. He was getting beaten up. He was off his game.
Felt like he was on his back more times in that game than the entire season combined.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, welcome to the new world. No Jordan Morgan next year. Something to figure out for sure in the offseason. But I like the fact that it's not all razzle-dazzle and pizzazz. Of course, Jedd Fisch is a quarterback guy, and the quarterback's important, and you have to have elite wide receivers to win in college football these days. But, man, you cannot ignore the lines, and I think that's the biggest lesson I took out of the national championship winner, Michigan, line play.
And we talk about Noah Fifita and T-Mac and Cam Burnett and Jacob Manu. Well, their teammate at Anaheim Servite High School, is it Mason Graham?
Mason Graham.
Big DT at Michigan. It's crazy to think that we went to go see Anaheim Servite play against St. John Bosco. And little did we know the number of Division I players that were on the field in that game.
Okay, what happened in that game, by the way? Servite got killed.
Yeah, they
got absolutely killed. It was probably like, I don't know if it was the worst game that Noah Fifita ever played in high school, but it might have been.
Yeah.
That St. John Bosco team was loaded as well. People have asked, like, why didn't Arizona recruit Mason Graham if they recruited everybody else? I don't know. I guess
it's tough to beat
out
Michigan.
Them all. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Now, let's say Jim Harbaugh leaves Michigan, which could happen. Could happen by the time this podcast is published.
Yeah.
Who knows? There could be some players from Michigan who enter the transfer portal if something like that happens. Just saying. Mason Graham could be someone. I have no idea, but you never know.
But then here's a nightmare scenario for Arizona. Michigan job opens up, and they poke at Jedd Fisch, who was a quarterback's coach there for 2 years under Jim Harbaugh, is a proven winner. I mean, heck, if you can turn around Arizona, man, imagine with the recruiting resources and the NIL money and everything you have at Michigan. Like, that is a dream job for any college football coach. And then you got players following Jedd Fisch over to Michigan. This is the interesting part of the offseason, Lev, in my opinion, because everything looks so good for Arizona right now. Like, they should be the favorite to win the Big 12. If not, they should be number 2 or number 3. They're going to be in that conversation to win the Big 12 next year, and they're also going to be in the conversation to go to the college football playoff. Unless Arizona doesn't do right by Jedd. And I think that Jedd has shown that he is capable, or he is deserving of, a fairly compensated contract, a contract in which gets him at least in the top half of the Big 12. Looking at those numbers of Big 12 coaching salaries, like Jedd Fisch right now would be the second lowest paid coach, just ahead of Gus Malzahn. For a team that's contending for a championship, that could be in the national championship conversation, you don't want that as your head coach. You don't want that as a school. Now, there has been a lot of back and forth. Lev, you and I have been trying to figure out what's going to happen with Jedd Fisch and his contract, but you've already seen the results or the consequences of stalling when it comes to contract talks. Because how much did I know Johnny Nansen has a relationship with Steve Sarkisian, and there's some relationships there, but I'm probably sure, I'm willing to bet that a key part of him going to Texas was because of money.
Oh, there's no question about it. Yeah, I think we'll be shocked when we see what those contract figures look like for Johnny Nansen. So I wrote about Jedd and his contract situation. It's appearing in today's paper. Today's Wednesday. So you can check it out there. You can check it out on our website, Tucson.com. That is it's a subscriber-only story, so you need to be a subscriber to read that one. I highly recommend, by the way, the overall Arizona Daily Star Tucson.com app, which is super streamlined and it's a very good user experience. But anyway, I talked to some people on both sides of the negotiations with Jedd. First takeaway, why hasn't this happened yet? I would say it's bureaucracy. It's having to go through ABOR, and ABOR not having their next meeting until February and being unwilling to have a special session in the interim. So that's number one. Number two, regarding the actual figures, what I was told, I couldn't get what the number is going to be, but I was told that he'll end up at worst in the upper half of the Big 12 head coach salary structure.
You can work with
and
that,
maybe
though.
maybe even in the upper third, depending what the numbers actually look like. Remember, we're adding Kyle Whittingham and Deion Sanders into that mix for the future. We don't know what the TCU and not SMU. Duh. I'm getting my numbers, my letters all screwed up. TCU and BYU coaches are. Somehow Baylor's information, even though they're a private school, that information's out there, so we know what Dave Aranda's salary looks like, and that's a little bit on the lower end too. But I'm going to guess that we're going to be north of 4.5 million or so, maybe inching up toward 5 by the end of the deal. And one of the questions that I asked in the piece is why does this need to happen at all? He did a new deal last December, right? In December of 2022. There really aren't any legitimate threats out there as of right now. And I mean, my response to that is that, number one, it's a good investment. Okay? Yeah. There are 2 sports that generate revenue for colleges: men's basketball and football. Football is the bigger.
Football's king.
In most places, it's the bigger revenue driver of the 2. So if you want to be good at that sport, you need to invest in that sport. In order to, you got to spend money to make money, right? That's number one. Number two, he's earned it, and rewarding a deserving coach. That's just kind of how the way things work.
Yeah.
If you want to keep him and make him happy, and seems like he wants to be here, and they want to have him here. And the premise of the whole column is that, considering that both of those things are true, why hasn't this happened yet? And I go on to explain, all of the various reasons, which I just kind of bullet pointed for you here. But yeah, this needs to get done. I don't know. It's really ridiculous that it hasn't been done already.
Yeah.
We're going to wait till mid-February to get this thing done?
About a month before spring ball.
That's crazy.
And also, loyalty has an expiration date. And loyalty also has a price at some point. And I think Jedd Fisch is loyal to some degree to Arizona because Arizona was a school that gave him the chance. He always wanted to be a head coach. Even when he was a journeyman in the NFL, all these stops in college, he wanted, at the end of the day, to eventually become a head coach. Arizona gave him that opportunity and said, here's the keys to the car. You do whatever you do. And Jedd Fisch turned a hoopty into a sports car. Like, now Arizona is put together and is driving right now and is street legal and is a great car that you want to be a part of. But the thing about Arizona is that at some point, someone's going to come knocking. Someone's going to come to Jedd Fisch and say, well, you've done so great here. You've done such a great job here. We're going to give you more money. You're also going to have better resources. It's just a better overall situation. And Jedd Fisch wants to stay here in Arizona. He wants to turn this program into a West Coast power. But if Arizona's not willing to get some stuff done, then Jedd Fisch is going to leave at some point. And honestly, would you blame him? I wouldn't. So Arizona needs to do right by Jedd Fisch. And I think Arizona's trying to do right by Jedd Fisch, Lev, but the big thing in the middle is the Arizona Board of Regents. At the end of the day, they're saying what they say, that's what's going to happen. It's all up to the Board of Regents.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're going to say no to whatever the contract situation is, but they're also just, they're not, I don't want to say slow playing. Slow playing it is not the right term, but they're certainly not showing any sort of aggressiveness or any willingness to bend a little bit by just, hey, let's have a special session. Let's knock this out. Let's do right, by Arizona. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with the fact that they've already spent a lot of time working on University of Arizona Matters, right? With the quote-unquote financial crisis that came up, and now they're kind of more, the A-board is more involved in kind of the day-to-day accounting that goes on at the university. So I'm sure I get it. There's not a huge appetite probably for, hey, now we're going to approve a huge raise for one of the, state's highest paid employees. But that's the cost of doing business. Yeah. If you want to be good at this. And a quote I mentioned in the piece is, Jedd appeared on Colin Cowherd's show on Friday, and Colin Cowherd was saying oh, you told me 8-9 years ago that you wanted the Arizona job, which is kind of random, right? But Jedd saw in Arizona, he was kind of has a lot of the elements that SEC schools have, except it's located on the West Coast, which he's taken a liking to, even though he's originally from the East Coast. And what I wrote in the piece was that's true to a degree. Yeah. I'm if he had had the exact same accomplishments at South Carolina or Mississippi State, that deal would be done by now. We would not be playing this waiting game that we're playing. The staff is still busy though, right? I think since the last time we did a podcast, a really good and important acquisition, I think, on the transfer portal, and I hope I say his name right, Alex Deuste. Deuste. We're going with Deuste? Yep. What can you tell us about Alex Deuste and why this might be a big deal?
It all goes back to line play. We're talking about the importance of that, right? And this man is a big boy. He's a large human being, 6'7", 295 pounds. And coming out of high school, he was a pretty highly touted recruit. I mean, he was a 3-star prospect, but I always look at the offers. I could care less about the star rankings, the numbers. Show me the schools who are interested in you. And he committed to Northwestern over Michigan State, Washington, some prominent schools. Arizona was obviously going after him. Brendan Carroll wanted him to come to Arizona. And he went to Northwestern, did 1 year there, decided, okay, it's not going to work out there. I'm going to go into the portal. He was being recruited as an interior lineman out of high school. If he is an interior lineman, great, but he's also big enough, in my opinion, to play tackle too. So you have some options there. You can cross-train in spring and figure out what is the best combination. In the Alamo Bowl, we saw Raymond Polito start at left tackle, and he started at right guard the entire season. If they want to, keep that plan, great. You could try Alex Deuce at guard, or you can move Big Jonah back inside. I mean, I think naturally in the NFL, he's going to be a guard. So why not give Big Jonah the year that he is draft eligible to play his natural position and put Alex Deuce at right tackle?
He went to Mountain Ridge High School
Phoenix.
In Glendale, northern Phoenix. So once again, this is a case of Arizona bringing an Arizona high school kid back home. Which they've had a lot of success doing that. A couple examples, Jacob Cowing, Gunnar Maldonado.
Big one.
Those are the two MVPs, right, of the Alamo Bowl right there. And again, like prior relationship, Brennan Carroll recruited him pretty hard because he's, like when you make that list on 247 as like recruited by, I mean, that probably shows that you were going at it pretty good. Didn't get him. Alex Deuce, chose a great institution, Northwestern. I'm not biased or anything when it comes to that. But, they had a coaching change last year, and he decided to come home. And I think that's the biggest pickup they've had in the portal so far. They only have 4 portal additions, and there might be some, case of like envy among U of A fans when they look around and they see how many ASU's brought in and Colorado's brought in, but
that's a good thing in my opinion.
Yeah, okay.
Quiet's
Explain.
good.
Why is that good?
Because it shows that you don't have many spots open, and Arizona can be selective in bringing in these type of players. ASU, they're like, anyone who has a pulse, come play for us. Like we are open for business. That's where Arizona was at a couple years ago when Jedd Fisch was first hired, and they brought in all these guys out of the transfer portal and all that. But then they developed so many of these young players. I mean, they don't have any spots open in the secondary for next season. They have one spot open at linebacker, but they also have a bunch of linebackers trying to compete for that spot who are already on the roster. Defensive line, you're losing a couple guys, but you're also just added Chuba Ma'ai, and you also have Tai Uyagalele trying to come back and probably have a more prominent role and get into that starting lineup. So Arizona's in a really good spot right now. They don't have to rely on the transfer portal. And the guys that they're bringing in, as Jedd and the coordinators have said, that they're going to be either starters or really good complementary players.
So I'm going to give you the number of transfers incoming for each of the Big 12 schools. Okay? Arizona State, 22. That's a lot. Colorado, 20. Look, Colorado, they've been pretty open about this. Dion is like, we are going to build through the portal. I mean, like, they barely had any high school players that they brought in. Yeah. That's not the way I would do it. Yeah. I wrote about this also. Like, I admire and respect the way that Coach Fisch, he's old school in that regard. Like, he believes in bringing in high school players and developing them. So, Colorado, 20. Houston and Cincinnati each have 15. Houston has a new coach. Cincinnati, a lot of struggles when they moved up from the American to the Big 12 last year. So you could kind of see the need for them to do that. TCU, 14. TCU took a big step back last year. So maybe there's a little bit of sense of desperation or urgency there. You've got UCF at 13. They're just very active in the recruiting market, period. Texas Tech with 11. That's the last school that has more than 10. They also had a disappointing season. Yeah. This past year, a lot of people thought they'd be like a fringe top 25 team. They weren't really close. West Virginia at 8. West Virginia had a good year. It turned out they went 9-4. I voted for them in the top 25. They should have been in there over Iowa. I have no idea why Iowa is in anybody's top 25. They're just not a good team. Sorry.
You mean Iowa? No O?
Yeah, I hadn't heard that one. That's a good one. Utah with 7. Not a huge number. That's like, that's kind of in the middle, and that's probably about where you want to be at the end of the cycle, right?
Yeah.
8 to 10 guys.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you have all with 4 or less: BYU, Oklahoma State, Arizona, Kansas State, and Iowa State. They all have 4 or fewer transfer portal. And when I look at Iowa State, I look at Kansas State. I'll even throw Kansas into this mix. Those are kind of like developmental programs, right? These are not the schools that are going to get a bunch of 4- and 5-star high school recruits. They're going to get 3-star players who fit their system, who have certain athletic traits or character traits, and they're going to try to, develop those players over the course of time. I think Arizona is that type of school too. Even though they're swimming kind of in these deeper waters now, they are still a developmental program. So you don't go chasing after everybody in the portal.
No.
Like you said, you can be selective. And they are, and I think I wouldn't have any sort of panic or whatever if I was a fan about this, because they've got their team in place and most of it's coming back. I do think the 2025 high school class is a big one.
Yes.
For them.
Yeah. Because that allows you to double down and really show, we're not a one-hit wonder with the 2022 class and all that. This is us really planting our flag and letting people know that Arizona football is here to stay.
That's the one. I think that one needs to be like a top 30 class. The last 2 have been ranked a little lower. There are reasons for that. We've talked about them on the podcast, whether it's, recruiting a lot of linemen who generally just don't get who aren't rated as high as a lot of the skill position players because they don't participate in these 7-on-7 camps, or this past year, getting players from schools that aren't traditional powerhouses, like Glendale Apollo.
Yeah.
3 guys from a school that, all due respect to all the 247 guys who work their butts off, but how many times have any of them seen Glendale Apollo play, in person? You know what I mean? So I think there's reasons that their classes haven't been as high the last 2 years, but I also think that the 25 class is an important one. You've got the 10-3 season. You've got all the momentum in the world. That's time to strike.
And a lot of these 2022 guys are going to be draft eligible after this year.
Yep.
So there's a possibility that you lose Ephesians Prysock. You lose Takario Davis. I mean, you already know you're going to lose T-Mac. T-Mac's a walking first-round pick.
And I think Jonas Savanaya, too.
Yeah.
Probably going to go after 3 years.
Yeah.
So you are correct.
It's important.
Yeah. It's interesting how this is shaping up, isn't it, this upcoming season?
Yeah.
It feels like there might be a little bit of a reset afterward with all those guys kind of peaking or leaving or whatever. And again, I wrote about the secondary, how all 5 guys are coming back. They could lose 4 of the 5.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
Because I think Gunnar Maldonado and Traden Stukes are out of eligibility,
Yep.
and Ephesians Prysock and Takario Davis could go to the draft after next year.
Yeah.
So, and it feels like we're pushing all of our chips into the middle of the table here
For
for 2024 season.
Well, and speaking of which, we talk about guys returning and how they're set up for next year. How's the defense going to look? Because Johnny Nansen is now at Texas, as we talked about, into the co-defensive coordinator / linebackers coach. And I know we got to talk basketball here, but just looking at the defensive coordinator position, I'm really curious to what Arizona's going to do. Now, people are like, do they go out and hire an outsider? I mean, do they elevate Dwayne Akina to defensive coordinator? My only issue is, who's going to coach linebackers? Now, Ricky Hunley was a stud linebacker at the University of Arizona, and he's been on the IR this past year. So do you look to get Ricky Hunley to possibly coach your linebackers, or do you go get someone who's got ties to the staff and it can run a similar defense that Johnny Nansen ran, so you can kind of just keep things going despite not having your leader?
Yes. This is a great question. And it's one of the biggest questions of the offseason, right? I think you said that and Jedd's contract, right?
That's
were the
number
two biggest issues that Arizona football needed to resolve here in the coming weeks and months. If you go back to when Jedd hired Johnny Nansen, no one had that, right? No one had that name. There weren't past links to Jedd. It kind of came out of nowhere a little bit. I think that Jedd wants to play a certain style of defense. And that is kind of that Pete Carroll cover 3, I think is what it might be referred to as. Like you're playing a lot of zone. You've got the bigger corners. You're limiting TVs. Big plays. You're keeping things in front of you. You are ideally generating a pass rush with only 4 rushers, right? Which is, again, that's what Michigan did against Washington, and it worked really well. Look, Jedd does not coach the defense, but I think he wants to have that type of defensive structure. So I don't think he wants to change that. Okay, so that's number 1. So I think you have to find someone who wants to play that type of system. Number 2, you do have someone in-house in Dwayne Aquina who's more than qualified for the job. However, Dwayne Aquina is also 70 years old. Does he want to have all of that responsibility at this point in his life and his career? I don't know that. We don't know that. With all due respect to my fellow 50-plus-year-old men, Ricky Hundley and Chuck Cecil and Dwayne Aquina, like, I don't know if you can have a staff with that many guys who are that old in today's day and age with as much work that is required on the recruiting front. So I think there's sort of 2 things. 1, who is the defensive coordinator? And 2, like, what do you want that defensive staff to look like? Like, I think you have to bring in somebody who is young, on the younger side, who's kind of a bulldog in recruiting and has a lot of connections, whether that's to the West Coast, to the Polynesian community, whatever the case might be, especially if you're going to elevate Dwayne Aquina to kind of balance the 2. You know, like, Ricky Hundley's a great coach. Yeah. No question about it. Chuck Cecil is a great coach. I mean, look at the improvement that the safeties made this year. But recruiting is another piece of the puzzle. And like I said, I think you need to have a mix of guys, young and old, on that side to have the best defensive staff. So, I don't know, long answer to your question about what things are going to look like, but those are some of the things that are important to me.
And who knows, maybe John Richardson, the cornerbacks coach, very young. I think I did a great job coaching up Takario Davis this year.
Sure did. Yep.
Maybe he's a guy who's interested in the job. You know, like I don't rule out anyone that's currently on the defensive staff. I mean, I'm talking about anyone. So,
yeah, we'll find out. I mean, Jedd's not going to be public about this either. Like I said, Johnny Nansen kind of came out of nowhere. Yeah. Like, I remember all of, was in the middle of that and all the various lists that came out, names that popped up, and he wasn't one of them. Yeah. And this is going to be, Jedd's going to do the hiring here. And I think I'm pretty sure that it's already been talked about with Dwayne Aquina, whether he wants to do it. And it's probably up to him if he wants that added responsibility. I mean, it's one thing to just be a position coach, and it's another to be the coordinator. Like, you have weekly media appearances, you're making game plans, you're in charge of a whole staff. He's certainly more than capable of that. Don't ruin
this for us, Lev. Weekly press conferences with Dwayne Aquina? Are you kidding me?
Sounds good, right? It's just whether he wants to, I think. Yeah. And then who does he want to bring in, or does Jedd want to bring in, is maybe that younger guy who, like I said, can maybe be a little bit more aggressive on the recruiting trail, and maybe is your kind of, defensive coordinator in training. But yeah, there's always churn in this sport. And if your expectation is that the staff is going to remain the same year in and year out, like, just not going to happen. Nope. It's just not going to happen.
Unless you're on the offensive side of the ball. That side of the ball's been great for Arizona.
Miraculous. Really.
Defense, not so much. Yeah. All right. Let's quickly talk some basketball here before we get out of here. It's going to be a quiet week at McHale Center because ain't no basketball going on.
It's like 4 games in a row last week. The schedule's weird. Women's basketball goes on the road up to the Pacific Northwest 2 weekends in a row?
Yeah.
Huh?
Should just stay up there.
I said that. I gotta ask our colleague PJ whether they're thinking about doing that rather than flying back and forth. I know they miss a lot of school, but you can do school online these days, as we learned from the pandemic. Meanwhile, men's basketball, they only have 1 game this weekend, a one-off at Washington State. I've been there and done that for football many times. That's Tommy Lloyd country.
Yeah.
So you've been, observing men's basketball. You
Yeah.
haven't been covering it per se, but what are your impressions so far of that team?
Caleb Love is an ultimate bucket. And I think if Arizona needs a bucket late in the game, I was wondering who would be that guy that would step up for Arizona. The first year under Tommy Lloyd, it was Benedict Mathurin, no questions. Like, he was that guy. Last year, to some degree, it was Azuolas Tubelis. But
he's not. He was not a create your own shot kind of player.
Yeah, he was. I'm going to run down the groove, down the floor. I'm going to be the best running big man in college basketball, and my teammates are going to find me. Caleb Love is the ultimate. Like, if you need a bucket, whether it's a 3-pointer, whether it's getting to the basket. I mean, the dunk that he had last week was unbelievable. I think that this guy is. I mean, if Arizona didn't have as many guards or players that could put up double figures, I mean, we would be, in my opinion, I think Caleb Love would be number 1 for Pac-12 Player of the Year. I mean, putting up just under 18 points per game. If Arizona wasn't as low as they were, he would be putting up seriously like 24, 25 points a game.
Yeah, I mean, they have a balanced system. They share the ball under Tommy Lloyd. So you're probably not going to get someone who scores like 25 a game in this system, no matter how good they are. If you look at the shooting percentages for Caleb Love, you might still say, whatever. He's not that great. 44.4% overall on field goals and 32% from three. But what I would say about him is he is a way better all-around player than he was billed to be.
Yeah.
Like, he's averaging 4.9 rebounds a game, 3.1 assists per game, 1.3 steals per game.
Really good defensive player.
And he can drive. You think about, he had this reputation as kind of a chucker.
Yeah.
He is really athletic at driving, getting to the free throw line, which is also sort of an underrated skill, right? Knocked down a bunch of free throws in the Duke game, if I recall, at the end of the game, shooting 86.7% from the line with a goodly amount of attempts. He's good.
Yeah.
He's really good. And it's been fascinating to watch him sort of be integrated into Tommy's system. Because that was the question coming in, right? Like, how does this kind of, this guy who likes to throw up a bunch of shots going to fit in to Tommy's team-oriented style? Yeah. And he's fit in really well.
Mm-hmm. And same with Keshad Johnson, the power forward transfer from San Diego State, who took over for Azuolas Tubelis at that starting power forward spot. And he may not be the high volume scorer like Azuolas Tubelis. Like, I don't think Keshad Johnson will ever put up 40 points in a game this season like Azuolas did last year. But the defensive toughness that he brings, it works better for Arizona than what Azuolas Tubelis brought. Tubelis was a really good offensive player, but defensively, that man was a liability at some points last year.
Tommy benched him in a game last year for that reason, right? And kind of called him out afterward too.
Like, I think about the ASU game that they lost off of a half-court prayer. And throughout that game, Warren Washington, ASU's big man, would spin Azuolas like a top and get to the basket. And Azuolas would have stone feet and just kind of, look like a fool. And going into the tournament, Arizona needed that toughness when Princeton was kind of just giving it to them. And they didn't have that. Keshad gives them an edge that they really haven't had at the power forward spot over the last couple of years. And I'm not trying to hate on Azuolas Tubelis too much, because I think he was a really good player and was in the running to win Pac-12 Player of the Year last year. But Jaime Jaquez, who, I mean, if Victor Wembanyama didn't exist, I think would be the NBA Rookie of the Year. But Azuolas Tubelis at that power forward spot, compared to Keshad Johnson, it didn't give Arizona that toughness. And Keshad defended the team's best players last year in the NCAA tournament and the national championship game. Now that he's a part of Arizona, you're really starting to see that toughness come to light. And for him to be at that power forward spot with all the tough and really skilled guards that they have, it's really a good blend for Arizona. And even though that they lost by 18 to Stanford, this is still a really good team that is destined to go far in the tournament.
Keshad Johnson has played the 5 in certain lineups too when they've, at the end of the game, obviously Umar Balo's free throw shooting has been an issue this year. And there might be times when they go to that kind of lineup and he's like big and strong enough to do that. He's also made more 3-pointers this year than he did in any full season previously at San Diego State. He has 14 made threes, career high in field goal percentage, career high in 3-point percentage, career high in free throw percentage. Come to Arizona.
It's the system.
And you will become a better offensive player under Tommy Lloyd. Here's one more question for you, Justin, regarding basketball. So they are 8-0 at home. Like, they feed off the energy of the crowd. It's pretty evident, right?
Yeah.
You could even say in the Duke game that they fed off the energy in the building that day. So they're 8-0 at home. They are 4-3 in away games / neutral site games. And as you know, in the NCAA tournament, where they haven't had great success of late, that's going to be an away / neutral site game. So can they create the energy that they play with at home when they're not at home?
This is why playing in the Pac-12 is beneficial for that. Because you can go on the road and there won't be anybody there. Like the game against Washington State, how many people are really going to be there? And what's crazy is that Arizona, for a lot of these teams, like this is their game. Like Stanford beating them.
Definitely was for FAU.
This is like the game that they get up for. Now, when you're in a road environment like a Washington State, you have to be able to generate your own energy and figure out ways to get through the library type environment that you're playing in. And I think that the games that they have coming up here at Washington State, that's definitely going to be a game where you can figure things out. They had an opportunity to do it at Stanford, but
Stanford just shot the lights out. I mean, it was ridiculous. What were they? They made 16 threes, which I think might have been a school record.
Yeah,
and shot well over 50% from three. I mean, that just doesn't happen.
And the following week, of course, they put up a stinker against UCLA. I think it was.
No, they beat UCLA.
Oh, they beat UCLA.
Yeah, that's how bad UCLA is. It was a much lower scoring game.
Yeah,
but I think. Did you see John Wilner's latest power rankings for?
No.
The Pac-12. I think UCLA is either at or near the bottom. Can you imagine? I mean, how is that possible?
Because the players that Mick Cronin inherited were perfect for his playing style. Jaime Jaquez, Tiger Campbell, all these really hard-nosed, gritty. Like Tiger Campbell, I think he's originally from New York, if I'm not mistaken. Like he's an East Coast guy. The players embraced Mick Cronin's tough coaching. And the batch of players that he has now, it doesn't work. And then when you're a high-level recruit and you're considering UCLA and your head coach is throwing the players under the bus and is not giving any of the opponents any kudos or respecting them, why would you go play for that guy? And to me, like...
he also rips his own players.
That's what I'm saying. Like, he rips his own guys.
Yeah.
Why would I go play for that guy? I just, to me, like, I thought Mick Cronin eventually, maybe it would work out at UCLA, but now, no one wants to go play for him.
In Wilner's Pac-12 power ratings, he has UCLA 11th, ahead of only Oregon State.
Yeah,
UCLA is 6-9, 1-3 in the Pac, and they're at Utah and Colorado this upcoming weekend.
And he tried
Good luck with that.
And he tried to do things a little differently and get some international players, and they haven't really been producing for him. So
talk about bringing it back to the beginning. Hey, man, get off of Tommy Lloyd's international corner, Mick Cronin. All right, Tommy owns the international market, and he knows what he's looking for. And I don't know, man. I think that Krivas is going to be sensational here, and I think Moraskis is going to be really good too. Yeah. And I think there's going to be a game at some point this year where he comes off the bench and hits some key threes. He's got a really nice looking shot. I think if he was on 11 of the other 11 Pac-12 teams, he'd have a much more prominent role than what he has now. But yeah, certainly an interesting start to the season. for Arizona basketball. A very fun team to watch. I find all the Tommy teams have been super fun to watch. Just the style of play.
And great people, too. Great personalities. The guys that are playing for the team, they play for each other. They love each other. They love being teammates with each other. And he's definitely got a good culture. Now, all you got to do is win in March. We could talk about all this January conversation, but
everyone will turn on him if they don't win in March. Yeah, no, that's true.
And that's what it was like with Sean Miller.
And speaking of the culture, real quick, I loved how Krivas had that great game the other day against Colorado, and huge hug from Ballo when he came off the court. And that's the guy that he's competing with for playing time, right? I mean, they played the same position, and it was like a huge, huge embrace over by the bench area. Yeah. And that to me spoke to sort of the culture, the unity, the camaraderie, all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. All right, Arizona men's basketball. They are on the road. They're taking on Washington State on Saturday, afternoon game, 4 p.m. tip-off on Pac-12 Network. It's going to be a cold one out there in Pullman. I think it's going to be like Kansas City type weather. Maybe not as bad. It won't be like in the
I'm not going.
Yeah. Wear your long johns, Bruce.
Yes. Yeah, and women's basketball is at Oregon State Friday, at Oregon Sunday. And then the following week, as I mentioned, they're at Washington and at Washington State. So, I don't know. Maybe they should just stay up there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And that'll do it for this episode of the Wildcast podcast. We'll be back at some point, I think either later this week or wait, no, today's Wednesday. Never mind.
Probably next week.
Next week. We'll be back next week to recap the Arizona basketball weekend.
We're going to get our basketball talent integrated into the podcast here coming up with Bruce Pasco and PJ Brown. So something to look forward to.
We'll get the
some people who know more about basketball than we do.
No doubt. All right, that is it for this episode of the podcast. Subscribe, rate, and comment the Wildcast wherever you get your podcasts. Download the Wildcaster mobile app off the App Store and Google Play for all your Arizona Wildcats coverage. And also check us out on Tucson.com.